Hi, everybody. Rob Volpe here. Welcome to this edition of Reading Between the Lines. Hi, everybody. Rob Volpe here. I'm coming to you from Chicago, and I've been thinking about patterns lately. And the patterns include things that we carry into our friendships, the patterns that we're seeing now playing out in politics and culture, and the patterns that either draw us closer together or drive us apart. So today, I want to take you through three threads that at first glance don't seem connected. The first one is what the Friendship Empathy Archetype Quiz has revealed about how we show up for each other. The second, I want to talk about that recent assassination of Charlie Kirk and what that moment is saying about our humanity and the way we are seeing each other's humanity. And third, we're going to talk about Jillian Michaels. You know, the fitness celebrity from The Biggest Loser. And she's been very publicly wrestling with change and her own journey and her own use of empathy. And I want to talk about what her story can teach us about empathy in practice. And my hope is that together, these threads are going to illuminate what's happening when empathy is tested and how we can choose to stay human. So let's start with friendship. So, those of you know, a few weeks ago, we launched the Friendship Empathy Archetype Quiz. The link to that is below in the chat. If you haven't taken it, want to take it again, it is still open. It's a really short quiz and it helps you see the role that you play most often in friendship. So, when you take the quiz, you're thinking about a particular friend and that relationship, and that will end up giving you a sort of archetype. And this isn't about boxing you in, but it's about holding up a mirror so that you can see how you're showing up and you can make conscious decisions about whether you're going to change it or not. So I'm going to share my screen. This is a first for these videos, and I want to share the results so we can take a look and talk about how that goes further. Here we go. All right, so we've got our 7 different archetypes, and by result, the number one was the nourisher, leading by far, 44%. A lot of you identified with this role. You are the ones who make sure that your friends feel safe, cared for, and seen. It's a beautiful thing. You're there for people, but it also comes at a cost. Sometimes you might be putting everyone else's needs ahead of your own, and that can be dangerous for yourself and your own particular needs. Next, we've got the therapist at 24%. If you typed as a therapist in that relationship, you are the space holder, the listener, the one that friends turn to when they need to talk something through. So again, it is a gift to be able to hold space for people, but it can also get heavy when you're always processing someone else's emotions. So you need to make sure that you've got balance. Maybe somebody else is a therapist for you, or you're doing the things to care for yourself that allow that energy that you're taking on to process through. Next, we see the strategist. And this is at about 12%. And actually, we've got the solicitor at 10%. So the strategist is that problem solver, the planner, they're the question asker. They're really trying to push the conversations deeper, bringing in structure and insight. But they sometimes are struggling to sit with raw emotion themselves. And so they go into strategist or fix-it role. While the solicitor is actually the situation, often you might find a solicitor and a therapist working together. The solicitor is soliciting empathy. So if you think about a friendship and you typed as a solicitor, and I am one of that 10% in one of my friendships, as I reflected on it, it's like, yeah, actually, this is the friend that I go to when I really need support for an issue that I'm facing, like big life issues. And so in those cases, I'm asking for empathy. I'm needing to be seen by somebody else. And so I fall into that solicitor role. It does not mean if you typed as the solicitor, it does not mean that you are not there for the other person. But in that dynamic, it may be leaning more towards you being the one needing empathy and support. So smaller group, we've got the ghost at 7%. And the ghost is the one that pulls back when things get hard. that can be a protective reaction, but it also can create different distance in the friendship. So if you notice that when things get hard with one of your friends, you're pulling back, or maybe one of your friends pulls back from you when you've faced a challenging situation, what they're doing is they're being the ghost. Understanding that gives you information so that you can have a good conversation with them about that and maybe close the gap if you sense somebody is pulling away from you, or if you're doing it with them, and start to reflect and have some self-awareness and some curiosity. What's going on with this situation? Why am I pulling away? What is it that's making me uncomfortable? And having that reaction. And then the rarest of all are the last two, at 2% each. One is the expander. The expander is that disruptor. It's that person that's really pushing us outside of our comfort zone and maybe reflecting us back so that we feel deeply understood, but also a little like they're talking the truth. It's really kind of cutting in there, and we need to address it. We need to do something about it. Additionally, we've got the echo, and the echo is the person that's mirroring back our sentiment and mirroring back the emotions, the feelings that somebody is presenting to them. And that can also feel uncomfortable if they are doing that. The challenge there, though, is they need to be making sure that their own needs are getting met. And so this is how everybody typed. It's really fascinating because nearly 70% cluster around the roles of giving, caring, and listening, the nourisher and the therapist. There's a lot of safety in that, but there's not nearly as much stretching or challenging. And if you think about the who are the stretch and who are the challengers, that's the strategist and the expander. So only 14, 15% of us are in our relationships, or at least as we took the quiz and who we were thinking about, are actually trying to push, expand, help people grow. And that gap um, between roles where we lean in and the ones that we avoid, that's actually where the disconnection can occur. So you want to think about, like, why are we so focused on being safe around other people, especially our friends? And what can we do to get more comfortable so that we don't forget to push and help each other grow? Take the quiz again, try a different friend in mind and see how you type. I think, as I mentioned last time, I typed once as a solicitor, as I mentioned, and I also typed as the therapist, which was surprising, not surprising. And I wanted to take it again and think about a few other friends, even work friends, and see how I type. And I have another suggestion for you about it as well when we get to the end. All right, so let's talk about something that's a lot harder. Let's talk about the news of Charlie Kirk's assassination. For a lot of people, Charlie Kirk was a polarizing figure. He was for me. I recognize Turning Point USA, the things that he was saying and doing. There were a lot of people, especially Gen Z young adults and men, admired him. But a lot of people also really strongly opposed his politics. He said, awful things, bigoted things about blacks, about trans, about the LGBTQ community more broadly, about empathy. But regardless of where you are and how you feel about Charlie Kirk, we have to confront a difficult truth. He was still a human being. And what happens when we stop seeing each other as human? You're not going to be able to connect with somebody. You're not going to be able to use empathy if we aren't seeing that humanity in each other. And it's really easy in moments like this and in the world that we're living in, when the algorithm is feeding us more and more an outrage, when you've got politicians on both sides ginning things up, fanning the flames. Um, it's really easy to let politics eclipse humanity. It's really easy when you're watching an opinion show or you're listening to somebody on TikTok or on Instagram go off about somebody else's viewpoints. It's really easy to stop seeing somebody's humanity. But you need to have empathy in order to see that humanity. You need to have humanity and see the humanity in other people in order to make connections for us to be together. We talk so much about the loneliness crisis that is going on, the disconnection that everybody's feeling, the way that our country is divided. A divided country means that we're not connected. And part of that means we're not seeing each other's humanity. And so this really fundamentally means remembering that every life has value and remembering that having humanity or having empathy with somebody, having empathy with their humanity, but having empathy with them, their points of view, that does not mean that you agree with them. It doesn't mean that you're condoning those viewpoints. And so, if we want to change the direction that a person, an organization, a politician, a political party is taking the country, the way forward, as it has always been, is through the use of our voices, our freedom of speech, through our ability to vote, for our civic participation. That's how democracy works. Cheering someone's death isn't democracy, it's dehumanization. And here's the hard part. Staying human in moments like this, it takes real strength. I've heard from several people, I've wrestled with it myself. You're trying to make sense of it, and how am I supposed to react? It is horrible. A human being died, yet this is somebody that did not necessarily value me or my community. Although Charlie Kirk did value the right to free speech and the right to share your beliefs, and he welcomed it. And that event that he was at was about um, facing differences and having those conversations. And that's about having empathy. It's about understanding somebody else's point of view. And that is not softness, it's the strength. And we need to find the strength to resist the contempt, to resist the shadow, the dark side in us. It's the strength to say, I see this person even when I reject the politics. That is the line that empathy draws. And it's one that we desperately need to hold and maintain. And then there are people like Jillian Michaels. So Jillian Michaels was former trainer on and TV host on The Biggest Loser. She's now turned into a wellness coach, health expert, and political pundit and commentary. There was a profile of her recently in the New York Times. The link to that is below. And additionally, I'm sharing a link to a short video conversation from the Raging Moderates, Scott Galloway and Jessica Tarlov, where they talk about Charlie Kirk, the situation around it, the immediate reactions that people were having, and the importance of finding our humanity. You might also find that interesting. But in this New York Times profile of Jillian Michaels, she talked about her journey and how she shifted politically. She moved from left to right while also wanting to still remain open and curious. And she recognized and used the word empathy in the interview. It stopped me in my tracks that, oh, there it is. Okay, she's getting it. We need to have empathy. We need to understand where other people are coming from so that we can have conversations about it. But unfortunately, that interview came out a few weeks after she had um, talked shockingly about slavery and how not everything in the United States is supposed to be about slavery. If I can find that clip, I'll put it down below, or the link to it at least, so you can watch and decide for yourselves. And that created a lot of backlash. A lot of people found that hurtful, misguided, misinformed, quite honestly. And so she got a lot of flack for that. But I found that this profile of her gave a nice perspective on who she is, the journey that she's on, and the role that empathy has been playing for her. And so I'm not excusing what she said about slavery on CNN. That was wrong. And as I said, wrong facts, wrong information, should not have been talking like that. And I'm not pointing to her as a perfect model of empathy. She isn't. But here's the point. None of us are. Her story is a reminder of what empathy can look like in practice. It is messy, it's uncomfortable, it's full of mistakes. Because the truth is, when you're trying to connect across differences, particularly political ones, it does not guarantee that you're going to get it right. Sometimes you're going to say the wrong things. Sometimes you're going to hurt people. And sometimes you're going to get called out. But if we want to bridge these differences, we have got to stay in the arena. We have to own our missteps. We have to have the courage, the grace to apologize, to be accountable, to own up to it. We have to continue to invest in listening, in learning, in choosing accountability instead of defensiveness. None of those things are weakness. It's courage. And that is the hard, necessary work of staying human that we all have to do. So, the friendship archetype quiz, Charlie Kirk, Jillian Michaels, how do all these three things tie together? Well, the archetypes are showing us that many of us avoid roles that carry risk about the being the expander, being the strategist, being vulnerable and pushing boundaries and challenging other people and challenging ourselves. Charlie Kirk's death shows what happens when empathy fails completely in those responses that we've seen, when disagreement has turned into dehumanization. And Jillian Michaels' story is showing us that empathy is messy and that it demands practice, accountability, and humility. And so the through line is really simple but sobering. This disconnection, that's easy. The empathy piece is what's hard. But empathy is also where the strength and the possibility live, and that's what we have to stay committed to. So here's what I want to invite you into this week. If you have taken that quiz, take it again, but think about somebody that you disagree with. Think about Uncle Joe, who at Thanksgiving you hate having to see because his political viewpoints are so different than yours, or perhaps it's that Gen Z niece or nephew who has political views that are completely different and really challenge you. Take the quiz, think about them, think about that situation, and tell me how you show up. How are you showing up? What does that say about the ways that you're practicing empathy and the different situations in which you're practicing empathy? And also share the quiz with a friend and compare notes. You can share it with a close friend and have a conversation about how each one of you typed as you think about each other. Where do you default and where are you holding back? If the two of you are talking about it together and talking about your results, are you happy and satisfied? Are both of you feeling fulfilled in the ways that you are supporting one another? Or is there an opportunity for growth? Next, I want to ask you to pause in that face of disagreement. Remember the curious breath. When something happens, when you see somebody that you oppose, pause. Don't react. Take a moment, take a deep breath, and inhale and exhale, and try to respond and ask yourself while you're doing that, how can I remember their humanity first? If you're watching a TikTok and it's got your ire up, if you're watching some Scott Jennings on CNN tonight and he's got you pissed off as he does so many people on the left, ask yourself, how can you remember his humanity first? And then how would you respond to him if you were sitting at that table with Abby? And then make room for messy growth, whether it's you or somebody else. Resist the urge to cancel people. Ask instead, what accountability is needed here and what growth is possible? Because at the end of the day, empathy isn't about comfort. It's about choosing connection over and over and connecting as humans, as people, even when it would be easier to turn away, connect as individuals. And that's the thing that's kind of shocking. Charlie Kirk died. He was killed on September 10th. The next day was September 11th, the 24th anniversary of those attacks. I lived in New York at the time, lived there for 3 years after the attacks happened. I remember how New Yorkers all came together. Yes, New Yorkers. We supported one another. We would give strangers hugs. We would ask each other, how are you doing? And we all knew what we were talking about, but we needed to be there. We were choosing connection instead of turning away. And that's what's called for in this moment. So if this conversation stirred something in you, please share it. Send the quiz to a friend, forward this video, grab the newsletter, forward it on, subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to this video channel. Because empathy grows when we spread it as well as when we practice it. And it feels really good when we do. So thank you for listening. thank you for practicing empathy, even when it's hard. It takes courage, but we have the courage. I am here for you. I've got your back. You can do this. You've got this. So until next time, I'm Rob Volpe. Thank you for watching this edition of Reading Between the Lines.